Check this out, guys. There's our little Skydio drone. What I wanted to show you was we're in four-wheel drive low. Yeah, we do have a Atlas in here. I'm going to bring it back to second and now first. And look at this 10 speed. It's practically brought us to a stop. We're just not even walking speed at this point. Let's bring it back into second, third. See, it's accelerating out. One of the nice things about the 10 speed is you can set it in whatever gear you want to keep the amount of compression braking that you want. There's not those wide gaps that you have with the 4 or 5. Here we are in one of the big boys. It's an LT4. As you can see, just a tiny application of throttle moves this heavy Jeep. In fact, you got to be careful because even though your Jeeps are 6,000–7,000 pounds, these LT4s have so much torque and power that you can find yourself speeding real easy. So we've done LT4s before, and we've learned a lot over the years installing these LTs, and they're getting to the point where they're rationalized. The LT4 is a different build than the LT1. While similar, the layout of the intake and the modules and the harness is different. Of course, we're running a intercooler pump and wastegate control, and it's a more sophisticated operating system. We will be doing an LT5 here soon, and that is even one step more complex because it's got the extra port injectors and the extra module to run it. So we'll be having an LT5 hopefully in the next couple of months. Everything in this Jeep is functional. We're going to go into cruise control right now so we can keep our speed down. I just did a test drive with a cammed LS3 that you're going to see probably right before this video, and that engine was probably putting out close to 500 horsepower. This engine's putting out over 600 horsepower, and there is a giant difference in drivability. This engine really is just like a standard normally aspirated engine. I drove this vehicle to Salt Lake and back, and it was just like driving an LT1 or an LS3 or any of the other test drives that we do. The cammed LS3 that I just did the video on was very rump. Idle was 900 RPM. You drive through a parking lot and alarms go off. Just a very different experience. And when driving it, it's not like that engine didn't have power. It had good power in the mid-range and upper RPM, where this engine basically has good power from off idle right to the red line. In the old days, we used camshafts to get power, but these days we're a little more sophisticated. These supercharged engines, and they've been around for a while, being computer controlled means that we can have our cake and eat it too. What that means is we can have the drivability of a standard normally aspirated engine idling at 500–600 RPM, but still have 600 plus horsepower. The downside obviously is the complexity and the cost. You all know that I like to buy the horsepower you want, get OE stuff. That way you're not messing around with aftermarket components or camshafts or aftermarket tunes, and that really is one of the big keys is the tunes. You can get as much horsepower you want out of almost anything by modding it, but the tunes and everything else that go along with it can get quite expensive. Not only that, some systems just don't lend themselves well to supercharging or turbocharging. And if you look at like the early JK with a 3.8 torque management based, the transmissions had a hard time coping with the supercharger, that is the automatics, and even with the Pentastar, that holds true. When you get an OE or a original equipment supercharged engine, the manufacturer's pretty much taken all the bugs out of it for you. They've tested it, they've tuned it, they've run it in different environments. In fact, when I had this vehicle up in Utah, just outside of Park City, it was 5 degrees in the morning, and opening the door sounded like crunching a potato chip bag. But I stuck the key in and this engine fired right up, idled, and took off. If you can afford the supercharged engine and you need, and that's a big word, need, this kind of horsepower, then you're not going to beat the LT4 or the LT5. Of course, you got the choice of the Hellcat, the Demon, the Helephant, and all that. I think that the GM powertrains with a 10-speed, and yes, this is a 10-speed vehicle, are unmatched for drivability. The bottom end torque these engines put out with the direct injection, and they have continuous variable valve timing, is unsurpassed. It's not that you can't get the same horsepower or more from the other guys. You can. I just love the way these GM powertrains drive, and they're much more easily tunable than most of the other options out there. Now, going back to the fact that this is an OE engine with over 600 horsepower, you got to ask yourself, do you need that much horsepower? An LT1 with 460 horsepower, which in the real world is closer to 500 horsepower, is more than enough for most JKs, even if your JK weighs 7,000 pounds. So the only reason you're going to want to get this LT4 or LT5 is for bragging rights, in my opinion. And I see a lot of guys get Jeeps that they mod, they put in superchargers, they get a Hellcat, whatever, and then after a little bit of time, they're just not happy with it because it's just this monster that they don't enjoy getting into and driving to the store long distance. It's either loud or rumpity-rump or has compromises. If I had $1 for every time a customer told me I like getting into my Jeep now, I like turning the key, hearing that sound, and then driving it from state to state, I would have a lot of money. Because that's really what it's about, it's fun to drive. And an LT1 is really fun to drive, and so is an LS3. So here's my advice. If you're gonna go out and beat your Jeep up, you're gonna run it on the trails at Moab, Rubicon, Fordyce, Roush Creek, whatever, then you don't need an LT4, an LT5, or a Hellcat, in my opinion. It's gonna cost you a lot more money, you got a more complex operating system. You could get yourself an LT1 or even a 6.4 Hemi and probably be very happy. In fact, and I know a lot of you are gonna say, it's not about need, it's about want. The 5.3 LT3, don't overlook it. That is a heck of an engine. With a 10-speed, it'll pull a heavy JK, get you good economy, running regular gas, and do it all at an affordable price. Now, I want to say that these engines are high maintenance and they cost a lot of money and all that, which to some degree they do, but I'll tell you, I just took a 1,000-mile road trip and everything went absolutely perfect. The oil, all the fluids, everything, and nothing needed any attention, even the tune. Now, I did play with the spark timing a little bit because I was playing with fuels up there, and the temperatures were mostly below freezing. So I did play with the spark timing a little, but that was about it. And other than that, this LT4 just plugged along just like it was any other engine. Here we are out in the office with this LT4 JK, running awesome, running cool. Here we are in an early Vegas morning, and we're gonna go in and test drive in a late model JK with an LT4 10-speed. I don't know if you guys remember Thrill Seekers with Chuck Connors, you know, the rifleman, where every week he'd have somebody on that did something stupid, like they'd put themselves into a coffin and blow it up, or jump off a cliff in a rubber ball. Well, we pulled this LT4 JK out of the shop, drove it minimally on the street, and I'm just gonna head out and do a 1,000-mile road trip. Well, it is a little chilly here, as you can see we're at about 8 degrees. But this LT4 fired right up. Let's see how it does. Check it out. This drink got left out in the vehicle overnight, and the vehicle was left out. I apologize if the video is a little shaky. The video stabilizer froze overnight. It'll thaw out. We're going to be going through the Provo Pass, which is covered in fog. But I think this is a good example of the LT4 being a daily driver engine. A lot of the exotic engines, 500, 600, 700 horsepower, especially the cammed engines, can be really temperamental, a little bit harder to start, but with fuel injection it's not really so bad. But the LT4 just starts up like a regular engine, runs like a regular engine, idles like a regular engine. There's nothing exotic or special about it. In fact, you don't even know it's got a blower on it until you get into it. I didn't document a lot of the drive up because it was very non-eventful. This will be a pretty good test. We're going to go from temps that were just above 0 degrees Fahrenheit, and we're going to head back to Vegas. When I left Vegas, the temps were about 90 degrees. I don't know if they're going to be that when I get there, but they're certainly going to be a lot warmer than this. And we're going to see how this LT4 copes with the environmental changes. Modern engines in general cope with the changes just fine, and that doesn't really matter what manufacturer. I do believe that the GM engines have a slight advantage because they do have a little more information than the Chrysler engines. GM doesn't just run speed density. They do run an airflow meter and a humidity sensor. So with the drop of ambient temperature and the fact that it's snowing, I think these additional sensor inputs can benefit the engine operating system. Now that over there, that fog is a lake, and you can't see the water. You can only see the fog. And my guess is the water is warmer. It hasn't cooled off as much as the air, so we're seeing that water evaporate off. The LTs do have a dual stage oil pump, so they have better control of oil pressure. And this can be important in cold temperatures. When you have an engine with active fuel management or dynamic fuel management, one of the issues GM faced early on was in cold temps like this. I think it was below freezing, so below about 32 degrees Fahrenheit. If you fired the engine up, the oil pressure would be really high because that oil was thick. and it wasn't hot. And it could overpressurize the active fuel management system and cause damage. So GM installed a secondary oil pressure relief valve on or in the oil pan, and that would bleed that pressure off. Early on, the guys didn't know this with the LSs, so they would mix and match oil pans to get the one they wanted. But if you put a non-DOD or AFM pan onto a DOD AFM engine, you could have problems. And I did have some customers crunch some lifters up in Michigan when it was around 0 degrees, because that oil pressure wasn't being bled off and they overpressurized the system. Now, a lot of guys will just ditch the active fuel management system, but with the LT, you're one step above, because having that oil pressure control means that you can now drop the oil pressure down rather than just try to bleed it off. So things have actually got a little bit colder in the past. We're at about 5 degrees Fahrenheit. There's a train up here, the Heber Creeper. Yes, the Heber Creeper is not an old guy. It's the historic Heber train, and you can see part of it right there. You can actually take a ride on the train. There was a station built in Heber, not for the train originally, but for the Olympics, the Park City Olympics. So when tourists went to Park City, they had a place to stop in Heber, because Park City and Heber are right up the road from each other. This is the Deer Creek Reservoir Dam, and I do believe this was built in the 1930s, somewhere around the same time as Lake Mead. It does seem like there was a lot going on back then with Roosevelt's New Deal. You can tell it's cold out because we've been driving for about 40 minutes and the ice hasn't melted off the hood yet. And in a JK, that's pretty unusual, because I think we all know how hot the JK engine compartment gets. So getting back to the technology and the LT engines, I don't really think I have to convince you guys about how advanced the LT engines are. I think what we have to ask ourselves is, how do we best implement this technology into what we do? The LT engine is actually pretty easy now to integrate into engine swaps. GM has made that available to us. Seeing LTs now being put into everything. Old Camaros, Mustangs, hot rods, supercars, you name it. Now, I do believe that an old rat rod or T-bucket requires an old small block Chevy or even a small block Ford. I don't think the LT really belongs there. But when we started doing these swaps about 4 years ago, there wasn't a whole lot of support to get this done. We are, of course, pushing the envelope on the new LTs. We are working on the L84 and the L87, and we should have support for those soon. And really, it's not about us. We've got the bracketry and power steering pump and all that sorted. It's about the electronics. Just waiting for the electronics to get supported, just like we did 4 years ago. Check it out. There's a little dam right there. I don't think you guys got a good shot of it. There's a waterfall up there, but it looks like it's frozen. Yep, no water coming down. All right, so we're in central Utah and it's still below freezing, but we got the windshield cleaned off. Here's a quick look at this JK. Late model JK, 40-inch tires, long arm suspension system, the whole 9 yards. You can see the intercooler here for the LT4. Let's take a quick look. Well, there it is. There's the big LT4. Here we are bombing along at about 80 miles an hour. Temps are still well below freezing. We're seeing the mist from these trucks turn into ice on our windshield. You notice that these O2 sensors are switching quite rapidly. Even up these grades, we're seeing this LT stay in closed loop, where I'd normally see an LS or even a Hemi go into open loop and go into performance enrichment. And that's because of all the technology that we have in these LT engines. Now, if we look at this page here, you can see that our trims are staying pretty close to zero. That's really good. We are staying in closed loop, so we're over 14:1 air-fuel ratio. 14.7 is about stoichiometric. You notice we're in vacuum right now. When the supercharger comes in, we're going to see that go to a positive value. Now, I'll be interested to see if we're going to go into performance enrichment or into boost, going up to slight grade. Notice that our fuel pressure is running well over 1500 psi. We're running 1700 psi. And for you old-time mechanics, you know that carburetors used to run at just a couple of psi. Fuel injection systems, low pressure, 8 to 10 psi. Then the high pressure systems 60 psi. Some of them are up there in the 120 range, but we're running just shy of 2,000 psi here. So you notice that our vacuum is dropping off. This this hill at 80 miles an hour is starting to flatline those O2s a little if you look at them. Notice our air-fuel ratio came back a bit, but we're still staying in closed loop. It's pulling the grade. Now, it is 21 degrees outside, so these cold temps don't help with engine performance. But we're not even going into boost with a supercharger. Getting close, but we're pulling the grade just with the direct injection. Starting to see a little flatlining on the O2s. Fuel trim's still perfect. See, our air-fuel ratio came back a little. There. We just went into performance enrichment, and we're out. We're also at the top of the hill. So that's pretty impressive that we can hold closed loop. What that means is you guys pulling trailers or under a heavy load at high altitude can get better economy by keeping the operating system in this closed loop state instead of going open loop and dumping fuel into it. Now we're going to be going down this hill, and we're probably going to see that we're going to go into deceleration fuel cutoff, which basically means the computer is going to shut off the fuel. And there we go. You can see that our O2 is a flatline lane. So we are on the last leg of our trip. It was very uneventful. I'd like to say more, but there's not a lot to say. We are now finally above 32 degrees, trying to defrost the windshield. I think we got a few LT1s coming up. We got a L87, but that probably won't be till December, maybe January. We've got the LT5 coming up, so stay tuned.